For those of you that do not know me, my name is Jacob Reinhardt. I am one of the youth pastors here, and I am just super thankful to be with you all this morning. I know some of you were thinking, wow, they let him come back after throwing pancakes into the audience. They did, and that means I can do it again sometime, so watch out, you never know. But yes, Jacob Reinhardt, one of the youth pastors, thankful to be with you all this morning. And a little bit about me is that I enjoy history. So I grew up in Ohio, which was very close to Pennsylvania. And so I remember as a kid, we would oftentimes drive over and go to Civil War sites like Gettysburg and other places like that. I loved it. And so because of that, I'm a little bit of a history buff in some regards, not as much as my dad is, but I enjoy history, and especially the founding of America. I think it's an incredible time, and we see a lot of amazing things happening during that time. And during that time, there was a man who was seemingly beloved by everyone, and his name was George Washington. Now, George Washington was the very first president of the United States. Quite an honor, right? And people really liked him so much that he served not just one, but 2 terms as the president. And they were like, hey, you should go for a third. You should have a 3rd term as president. And he was like, I'm okay. I just want to be a normal citizen. But at this time, when George Washington said no to a 3rd term, at the end of his 2nd term, he did something that we would later find out to be called a farewell address, the presidential farewell address. And it's the very first one. Obviously, he was the first president. But the presidential farewell address is this time when a president, at the end of his term, reflects back on his years as the president, commemorates all the things that have been accomplished, but then also looks forward for where the country he thinks should go. And so there's actually a draft written up by Alexander Hamilton after George Washington's 1st term, to which then another one was then written up by Thomas Jefferson after his 2nd term, and George Washington put in his ideas, revised it a little bit to then have it published. And it's incredible. You should go and read it. It's a little lengthy, but it's worth it because we see in there the very thing of saying how grateful he was for his time as the president, but looking forward to how he feels like this is the way the country should go. This is what will be profitable when the time comes. Now, many presidents have done it since then, and it was kind of revised with Harry Truman. If you know anything about Harry Truman, he became president at a horrible, horrible time. It was 1945 when he became president, and it was after the death of President Roosevelt. And in the first 4 months of Harry Truman's presidency, Germany surrendered and the atomic bomb was dropped. The first 4 months of his presidency. And so Harry Truman kind of revitalized this idea of a presidential farewell address. And in it, he says, I had to make some hard decisions that not everyone agreed with. But you have to understand that I am just human, and I was doing the best that I thought I could do. After that, many presidents have done a farewell address. And one theme that I continuously see through all of them is that there's a gratitude of the time that they have served, that they're thankful for it, and that they also are encouraging the country to look ahead to the blessings that will come and the hard work that still needs to be done to continue to move forward. And I think it is an incredible thing. I don't know if you've ever been a part of anything like that, but I'm sure all of us have had endings to a certain season, and then we were then going on to a new season. And most times, I feel like in most cases, those endings are bittersweet, right? They're bittersweet because you might not necessarily, sometimes, but not necessarily leaving a hard season. Again, sometimes there are, but usually when you're leaving a good season and just going on to a new one, there's a bittersweetness to it. You're thankful for where you have come from, you're thankful for that season, but you're at the same time a little bit sad that it has to end. But you're excited to look forward of what is to come. We've all had those times, the ending of a season and the beginning of a new one. As we dive into our passage today, we'll be in John chapter 16, wrapping it up. We find ourselves at the very end of the upper room discussion. So what that means is that Jesus is gathered with his disciples in this upper room, and they're sharing this meal together. And Jesus is telling them all of these different things. And it is kind of like a presidential farewell address. Jesus is telling them, hey, here's what's going to happen, and he's trying to prepare them for that time. So like I said, we are in John chapter 16, and we will begin in verse 16. If you do not have a Bible, I think the guest servants, they got ahead of me. They already came down or passing Bibles around. If you need one, you can just raise your hand. They'll give you another one. Well, probably not another one. That'd be obnoxious. All right, boom. John 16:16. Here we go. Jesus went on to say, in a little while, you will see me no more. And then after a little while, you will see me. At this, some of his disciples said to one another, what does he mean by saying, in a little while, you will see me no more? And then after a little while, you will see me. And because I am going to the Father. They kept asking, what does he mean by a little while? We don't understand what he is saying. Now, the grammar here would clue us into the fact that the disciples here continuously ask each other, what in the world is Jesus talking about? This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. If you guys have ever been a part of something where someone's like telling you a riddle, it is only fun for the person telling the riddle, right? No one likes to like hear a riddle and then, oh, this is so fun, let me just try to figure it out. No, I mean, if you do, that's great for you. I don't, right? So the disciples keep asking each other and they're like, what is he talking about? You won't see me, then you will see me. Like, is this some kind of weird peekaboo type situation? Like, what is happening here? But they keep asking each other. And I find that this is horribly, horribly idiotic. That they are confused by something that Jesus has said, and instead of asking Jesus about it, they ask each other. Jesus, the Son of God in the flesh, is right there telling you something confusing. Why would you not just ask him? Now, maybe it's a little bold to say how horribly idiotic, because I think we can sometimes do the exact same thing. There are many things in life, let's be honest, that are difficult. Ellie mentioned this morning of maybe we're all kind of in this busy season, right? There's lots of things in life that we are confused about, worried about, that give us much anxiety. But instead of running to the creator of the universe who knows everything, we just run to each other and say, hey, what's going on here? Can you help me with this? Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't seek wise counsel. That's good, and it's something that we should do. But if we neglect to go to God, we have missed something. We have missed something. Now, I have a couple thoughts of why we might do this. And I think the first one is we might have some sort of insecurity, whether it be a doubt that, oh man, if I go to God with this thing, I don't think he's actually going to answer me. Or I think he's going to take a really long time to answer me, and I want it to be in my timing. Or it could be that we don't want the answer that we think we're going to get. Now, all of you have been little kids before. You might forget it, but you were. As a little kid, we often do something extremely interesting, horribly fascinating that we do with our parents. And it's this thing of we know which one will say yes and which one will say no, right? Yeah, you all are nudging each other like, you're the one that always says yes, get it together. But as a child, you very quickly figure out, okay, if I want this thing, if I want to go to my friend's house, I know which parent I need to ask, okay? For me, I think it was more my mom. For Carly, definitely her dad, like hardcore her dad. So it's so funny to see that how early children can be clued into the fact that they know who to ask, right? But sometimes, as a kid, you kind of forget that, right? So maybe you go up to the wrong parent, the no parent, and you go, hey, can I do this thing? And they go, no. Well, then you go, all right, I'll just go ask the other parent. Sure, like no problem, right? And then they say yes, and then it always gets found out, right? And no one ever gets away with that as a kid. So then you're in trouble, right, with your parents, and then the parents are in trouble with each other because they're like, you said no, why'd you say that? I think we do this exact same thing with God, is that we really only want to go to God when we feel like he is going to give us the answer that we want to hear. We can be just like the disciples sometimes. In this moment, the disciples are asking each other, trying to figure out what's going on, is that we too can neglect asking the creator of the universe, who knows everything, to give us clarity as to what is happening in our situation. Verse 19 now. Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this. So he said to them, "Are you asking one another what I meant when I said, 'In a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me'? Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come, but when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away that joy." Jesus uses a very interesting phrase here, very truly. Maybe in your translation it says truly, truly. And this is Jesus saying, hey, pay attention, listen up. What I'm about to say is very important. Don't miss it. Again, these are Jesus' final words to his disciples before the crucifixion. Some scholars would say that when Jesus is saying here, when he says, "You won't see me, and then a little while you will see me," that he's referring to his ascension and then his second coming. But it is far more likely, especially as we continue on through the text, that he is referring to his crucifixion, when you won't see me, and his resurrection of you will see me. Jesus here is saying, hey, you gotta get this. If you don't remember anything else I said, you gotta get this. This is so important. These are the final words that Jesus is communicating to his disciples as John portrays it before he is arrested, beaten, spit on, whipped, and hung on the cross. And in it, Jesus is saying, he's preparing them for this moment, and he's saying, you are going to grieve. You are going to mourn. This is going to be a difficult time. But what's worse is that when you are grieving, when you are mourning, when you are weeping, everybody else is going to be rejoicing. He says the world will rejoice. Now, all of us in this room have lost loved ones before. All of us. And that is difficult enough, no matter how it happens. Whether by accident, it was abrupt, or it was even just a peaceful going, we all have lost loved ones. And that is difficult enough. Think of yourself like at the funeral, at the calling hours, and you are mourning over the person that you love. And while that's happening, someone else is clapping. That they are celebrating over the death of that loved one. How utterly inappropriate and offensive. And yet this is the exact dynamic Jesus says is going to happen. You are going to weep and mourn. And while you're doing that, while you're having a horrible time, everybody else is going to be celebrating. Celebrating. You know, I often hear a question, I think it's a fun one, but it's this question of, hey, if you could go back in time and talk to anybody, who would you choose? Who would you choose? And I remember as a kid, and even till this day, like my answer is most often, I want to talk to Jesus, right? Now, even some of you are thinking, well, yeah, you're a pastor, Bible college kid, of course you want to talk to Jesus, right? But within our society, in our Christian circles and in not, we've kind of built up this shame of, well, of course you're going to say Jesus. Like, pick someone who's actually interesting, you know? Like, that's the Sunday school answer. Pick what you really wanted to say, kind of a thing. And I remember as a kid kind of feeling that way and sometimes answering the question in a way that wasn't fully honest because I did want to talk to Jesus. I recently saw a video a couple weeks ago of the actor Paul Rudd, Ant-Man. Pretty good actor, I like him. But he was in an interview with a few other people, and he was asked this question, hey, if you could go back in time, talk to anybody, who would it be? And his answer was Jesus. Now, he's not a believer, but that's his answer. And as soon as he says it, everybody else that's being interviewed starts to snicker and make fun of him. And I thought that is so interesting to me. Terrible, but interesting to me that this answer of saying, I would want to go back and talk to Jesus is mocked. It's laughed at. And in it, Paul Rudd's like, whoa, hey, don't laugh at me. I want to go back and ask him if what he really did worked. And as I watched the video, I was like, that's a fair question to ask as a non-believer. But I think it reveals this thing in our society where we just have this shame of wanting to actually go back and talk to Jesus. But when I think about the crucifixion and the resurrection, when I think about the disciples in this moment, I would have wanted to be there. Wouldn't you? Friday would have been terrible. Saturday, difficult. But Sunday morning, I would have wanted to be there sprinting to the tomb. I would have wanted to be there, to be in the moment and see how amazing it was that the tomb was empty and that Jesus had risen again. I would have wanted to be there. This is the dynamic of grief and mourning and joy that Jesus is trying to communicate to his disciples. He's saying, look, it's going to be hard. You're going to grieve over the fact that I am gone. But you will have joy. You will have joy. And he says something so amazing. He says, it's a joy that no one can take away. And he uses this illustration of a woman in labor pains. I have no clue what that's like, thankfully. But it's difficult, I know that. It's difficult and there is pain involved. But Jesus says, look, when the child is born, all of that is forgotten. And all that's left is the unsurmountable joy of having a child. I've heard it been said before that, if you go up to a mom with some kids and you say, oh, like they're so beautiful and so cute, more often than not, you're not going to get the response, oh, the pain, it hurt so bad, it was just awful. No. You get the response of, oh, thank you so much. Yeah, they're so sweet. They're a handful, but I love them. That's the response that you will get. And so this is what Jesus is using to illustrate the fact that, look, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have grief. You're going to have mourning. You're going to be weeping. But you will have a joy that will outshadow all of that pain. And that joy can never, ever be taken away. I think this word joy is very interesting. I think sometimes we can confuse it with the word happiness, right? And I think we need to separate those two things. Because happiness, it can ebb and flow, right? Happiness can ebb and flow because we can have a good day where everything worked out in our favor, or we can have a bad day where nothing went our way. I've had both of those days, and it is a roller coaster, right? And so our happiness kind of ebbs and flows. It goes up and down. But joy is something totally different. Joy, there's a confidence in where it's coming from. And this joy is not because of a good day or something that went well for us. Joy is only from the fact that Jesus Christ went to the cross, died for our sins, but then 3 days later rose again, defeating both sin and death. That happened. That is where our joy is supposed to be anchored. Nothing else, just that. And you know what's so great about that and why it can't be taken away is because that's not going to change. We aren't going to pick up our Bibles one day and be reading through one of the Gospels and read, oh, but Jesus didn't rise from the grave. What? That's not going to happen. Books don't do that, but it's not going to happen because it happened. Jesus actually died and rose again. No one can change that. People can tell you it didn't happen, but they're lying. It happened, and that's where our joy is found, and that's why it can't be taken away. Verse 23 now. In that day, you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly, I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now, you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask, and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. Though I have been speaking figuratively, a time is coming when I will no longer use this kind of language, but will tell you plainly about my Father. In that day you will ask in my name. I am not saying that I will ask the Father on your behalf. No, the Father himself loves you because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and entered the world. Now I am leaving the world and going back to the Father. What Jesus is communicating here to his disciples is utterly, amazingly provocative. Jesus is coming in first century Judaism, which is standing on the foundation of Old Testament Judaism. And we look at the Old Testament and understand the temple rituals and laws, we find something completely different than what Jesus is saying is going to be the norm. At Nexus, with our high schoolers, we have been going through a series talking about God's presence and what it means for our lives and how it worked in the Bible. And recently we went over the entire Old Testament. JT did that for us in one sermon, which was good. Hard for him, but good. Going through the Old Testament, we find that God's presence resides in the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place. And this is the inner room of the temple. And this is where God's presence is. And what's interesting about that place is that only one person, the high priest, could enter there one time a year. One person once a year. That's not a lot. It's almost nothing. One person once a year could enter into God's presence. And then for Jesus to come along now and say, yeah, you are going to have free access to God. You no longer will have to have someone do it for you. No longer is it going to be how it used to be. And we see at the crucifixion that as Jesus gives up his spirit, at that very moment, the veil in the temple tears in two. You see, the veil was the thing that was separating the most holy place from the rest of the rooms. And so for it to tear in two, literally and metaphorically signifies that we now have access to God because of what Jesus did. But what I think is so beautiful about that entire thing, yes, it is amazing that we can have free access to God, but what I think is so beautiful is the why. The why. Right? Jesus is declaring that this is how it's going to work from now on, but that's not just all. He's not just saying, hey, this is how it works, you're good to go. But he says, you will have a relationship with God because you have a relationship with me. The Father loves you because you have loved me. That's why you can enter into the presence of God. When we understand it in the most mysterious but literal type of way is that as we enter into relationship with Jesus, because Jesus is part of the Trinity, that means that we enter into relationship into the life of the Trinity. Again, mysterious, right? Confusing, but it's the truth. That we get to enter into the life of the Trinity, of God, because of our relationship with Jesus. And so Jesus is saying, look, this is what's coming. This is your future. This is the joy that I am talking about. This is why this is so important and why Jesus is communicating to it, his disciples, in the final address to them. Verse 29 now. Then Jesus' disciples said, now you are speaking clearly and without figures of speech. Now we can see that you know all things and that you do not even need to have anyone ask you questions. This makes us believe that you came from God. Do you now believe? Jesus replied. A time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone. Yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. I have told you these things, so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So here the disciples are saying to Jesus, oh, yeah, we get it now. Thanks. You aren't giving us riddles anymore. And Jesus kind of answers back to them of like, do you really though? Like, do you really understand what I'm trying to say to you? But more than just Jesus questioning their understanding, he's also questioning their devotion. He's testing them a little bit because he knows what's going to happen. And he says it to them plainly. You all are going to abandon me. And we see in the next coming chapters and the weeks to come here, we'll see that as Jesus is arrested and tried, his disciples are pretty much nowhere to be found. His closest friends, the people that went with him everywhere he went, and in his most difficult time, are nowhere to be found. As a youth pastor, I get the extremely fun job of fielding interesting questions. So fun. And one of the questions I often get when we go through stories in the Bible is, how could they have done that? If I was there, I wouldn't have done it that way. And I think that that's a fair assumption to have, especially when it's like a middle schooler asking me the question. Because we do this a lot, right? When we think about Adam and Eve in the garden, I think this is where it comes up the most frequent. When we think about Adam and Eve in the garden and the command to not eat of the fruit, it is so easy for us to think, oh, I wouldn't have done that. Like, God's given me all these other blessings. Like, I wouldn't have done that, right? Or when we think about the Israelites during the Exodus, and all they do is complain, and then they build an idol, we think, oh, I wouldn't have done that. I'd be so grateful for God bringing me out of slavery. And then here with the disciples, when they all abandon Jesus and scatter to their homes, as he says, we think, oh, I wouldn't have done that because I would have remembered Jesus telling me how he was going to rise again. I think that we all do this at some point. I have done it many times. And it's an arrogance that we have to think this way. And we sometimes forget our human condition because the real question is, okay, if you wouldn't have eaten the fruit, if you wouldn't have disobeyed God then, at the beginning, why do you still disobey him now? Or if you wouldn't have complained during the Exodus like the Israelites did and built an idol to worship, why do you complain and worship other things now? Or here with the disciples, when we want to say, oh, I wouldn't have run away and abandoned God, well, the question is, why do we sometimes do that now? You see, we are just like all the people in here, aside from Jesus. I mean, we're trying to be like him. But we are just like everyone in there. When we look at these stories, especially this one here, we have to remember they're humans too. That this is real history. And that we are no better. That we have to remember that we oftentimes disobey God, we complain, we abandon him. We can be just like the disciples. And I think we have this arrogance is because we have this whole book, this entire thing, right? I think we're blessed to have that. Of all the people that we read in here, they didn't have this entire book to go off of. But we've been blessed to have this entire thing given to us. We know how the story ends, right? Specifically thinking of the disciples here, when they go to abandon Jesus, we know how it ends. And that's why John says, so that you may believe. That's why these things have been written down, so that you may believe. We have the Gospel of John and everything else in here so that we may believe. Not so that we can say, oh, I would have done it better. We are blessed, and we often forget that. Even in those times when I'm thinking of, oh, I wish I would have been there at the moment during the crucifixion and resurrection, I still have to come back and say, I am blessed because I know the whole story. I know the whole story. And it's to my benefit that I have it. Jesus says to his disciples, look, you're all going to scatter to your own home. You're all going to abandon me. All right, but he says something interesting. He says, but I won't be alone. I will have the Father with me. Sometimes there are times in life when we can feel all alone, right? No matter the situation, a really difficult one or a not so difficult one, we can feel alone. And here, in Jesus' time of being totally alone, we see him in the garden sweating blood. And he's seemingly alone, but he's not. Even during this difficult time, Jesus is confident in his relationship with the Father. And it's in our difficult times, too, that we can be confident in our relationship with the Father because of our relationship with Jesus. We live in a day and age where it's a lot about feelings, right? Well, I don't feel it this way. I don't think it's true because I don't feel it. I'm going to tell you right now, you probably won't. God has given us emotions and given us ability to feel things, and that is a way that we can interact with him. But that is not the only way that we can interact with him. Even this week, as I was thinking through this and praying through it, there were moments where I was like, God, are you really listening to me right now? Like, are you hearing me as I'm asking you for help? And I didn't necessarily feel it. But I remembered that I have to be convinced, because of the truth, that yes, he does. Yes, he does hear me, because that's what he promises. Yes, he is in relationship with me, because that's what he promises. In those times when I might not feel it, or you might not feel it, that's when truth is so amazing. In those instances, truth far outweighs the feelings of it. And here, the truth for Jesus is that, yes, the Father is with him. That's where his confidence is. And I think that is so amazing. We face those difficult things and those troubles. Our goal is often to find peace, right? My question to you today is where are you finding that peace? Is it in other people? Is it in social media? Is it in a hobby? Is it in something completely different? When you face a difficult thing, where do you find peace? Jesus, right here in this passage, says, you will have peace in me. In me. We've been going over some of this language with the high schoolers of this in me language. And what it means is that peace is literally part of Jesus' identity. Like, you can't separate the two. You can't just say, oh, Jesus gives me the gift of peace. No, he is peace. So where are you finding your peace today? And I love how Jesus ends this. These are the very last words that he says, according to John, before he goes to his crucifixion. His very last words to his disciples is, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Take heart, I have overcome the world. That's bold, especially considering that the world he's referring to in the next couple of days will kill him and will rejoice over it. From where I'm standing, that does not look like overcoming. But when we consider everything, that we cannot separate Friday from Sunday, that even though this world was rejoicing at the point of Jesus' death, it was only for one day. For one single day, the world rejoiced over the death of Jesus Christ. Do you know how long we've been rejoicing over the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ? Almost 2,000 years. Now, I'm a pretty competitive guy, and I'd say we're winning. Almost 2,000 years, and who knows the amazing party that's going on up in heaven and will continue for all of eternity because of what Jesus did. And the world rejoiced for one day. That is overcoming the world. So, my question today is, okay, what are we supposed to do with all of this amazing truth? Like, how does this actually make a difference in my life? As you guys leave here today, what are you really supposed to do with this information? Well, I think the first thing is that we should have joy, even when it's hard to have it. I don't know all of your circumstances. I don't know everything you're going through. Family difficulties, issues at work, trouble with the kids, whatever it might be, it can be hard to have joy. But Jesus says that we have a joy as followers of him that can be taken away by no one. No one. And I think we forget that sometimes, that we forget that we have a joy. It's different from happiness, but it's a joy that is anchored in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Sometimes I have asked myself, okay, I know the benefit of being a follower of Jesus. And the benefit is, right, I get to spend eternity in heaven with him, that my sins have been forgiven. And that is amazing. But sometimes in my moments of doubt, in my moments of being totally, utterly human, I think, yeah, but what's really the earthly benefit? As a high schooler, I remember there were times where I was like, this is terrible. All my friends are going out, having fun, doing things, living their life, and I'm sitting here doing nothing because I'm a Christian. How is this a benefit to me? How is it a benefit to me? Well, I think in those moments, sometimes we can be totally ignorant to what God is doing in our life. That either we are just blind to it or willingly choose to ignore it, of how God is working. When I look back at my high school days and I think about all my friends going out and partying and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and I was sitting at home, I am grateful that I was sitting at home. Was I a little bit bored and lonely? Sure. But I wasn't giving myself over to sin and to things that were not honoring to God. That is to my benefit. I didn't see it in the moment. For those of us, as we go to work, as we see friends and family, especially those who aren't Christians, it can be easy to ask, man, what really is the benefit of me being a Christian here on earth? Like, wouldn't it just be worth it to just, before I died, to just say a quick prayer of asking for forgiveness and then I'm good for all of eternity and I can live my life the way I want to? We need to be careful to remember that it is not all about us. It's not all about us and enjoying this life. There's a quote by a commentator that says that the blessing of the Old Testament was prosperity, and the blessing of the New Testament is adversity. The blessing of the Old Testament was prosperity, and the blessing of the New Testament is adversity. Are you facing trials and struggles because of your faith, specifically when sharing it with others? Because that's what this is referring to. Are you going out and sharing your faith? Are you going out and living like it? And are you facing difficulties because of it? To be honest with you guys, I live a pretty comfortable life. I like my life. But I know that is not the point. The point is not to live a comfortable life and say, oh, I just get to enjoy all the blessings of being a Christian. No, the point of living a Christian life is being on mission, going and sharing your faith, loving people the way that Jesus loved, making it known that you are, in fact, a Christian. Look, we live in a post-modern world, in a post-Christian America, and so as time goes on, the conflict for Christians is going to increase. I'm not saying just go out seeking persecution for the sake of persecution. No. But go out seeking to tell others about Jesus for the sake of Jesus. And you will probably get persecuted along the way. But that's the blessing. Adversity is the blessing of the New Testament because I can stand up here and tell you that joy comes from it. That even if there are moments when you're like, I've been trying to share my faith with someone for so long, I've been trying to be a good Christian for so long, that those are hard sometimes. But when we ultimately completely surrender our lives to live for Jesus, there will be joy. There will be moments that will be hard, but those moments will turn to joy when we realize it was all worth it. And those moments are when someone comes to faith. Those moments are when someone gets baptized. Those are the beautiful things that we should be seeking. Not just fun hobbies, not just the best way to live our life. We should be seeking to live for Jesus. As we read the New Testament, the rest of it, Paul and the other apostles, as we read through, we don't actually have a graphic account of the crucifixion. At no point is Paul or the other apostles, do they write, oh, it was just so terrible. Like they took him away from us. They arrested him. They beat him, put a crown of thorns on his head. It was terrible. It was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. You are not going to find that in the New Testament. But what you are going to find is the joy that comes from that. You're going to find the gospel spoken of as a gift, as something to not be ashamed of, as a beautiful wedding, a marriage. This is how the New Testament authors speak about Jesus being crucified and resurrected. As the band comes out, I want to leave you with Jesus' final words that he says to his disciples. His very last words to them, according to the Gospel of John, before he goes to be arrested and crucified. He says in verse 33, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. There's an old hymn. I grew up on hymns. There's an old hymn called Victory in Jesus. It's a good one. It is such a good one. We have victory in Jesus. That his triumph over sin and death, that his triumph over the world is our victory too. And so as you go out and you experience life, hardships, and difficulties for him, remember, he has overcome the world.